the Grouchy Nerd.
Alright, quiet down, knuckleheads. It's time to take another look at a new hero pack for Fantasy Flight Games Marvel Champions. This time we're looking at Rogue. No, the U goes after the G. Anna Marie something. This character came out in 1981, and no one's ever given her a last name until she married Gambit and took the name LeBeau. But she's just been Anna Marie for the past 40 years. Wait, 40? 1981 wasn't... She was born in a hippie commune in Mississippi, but when her mother vanished, her father left her in the care of her ultra-strict aunt, from whom she ran away. Living on her own, she eventually adopted the name Rogue and joined the company of mutants Mystique and Destiny, thinking of them as her surrogate moms. Her own mutant powers, the ability to absorb someone's energy and psyche, including memories, as well as superpowers, from skin-to-skin contact, emerged in the middle of her first kiss, which left her would-be suitor in a coma from which he would never wake. Is there a single mutant whose powers presented themselves not in a time of trauma? We got dead parents, dead friends, whatever this is. And for a bit of extra torment, she has absolutely no control over these powers. She absorbs through any skin-to-skin contact, though the coma thing was an extreme case. Hoping to prove herself to Mystique so that she might be allowed to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, she tackled Carol Danvers, at that time going by the name Ms. Marvel, in hopes of knocking her out and taking some of her powers. But instead, she absorbed all of her powers and her memories, permanently. Carol was even depowered for a time and got her powers back in a whole different way. Twice, I think. That's happened 2 times to her? Whatever, it's not her show. Rogue was left with strength and flight. Eventually, having Carol's memories on top of her own started to drive her a little crazy, and she sought the help of Charles Xavier, who, despite protests from the rest of the team, invited her to stay and join the X-Men. Since then, she's absorbed a lot of powers, sometimes all at once. Started dating Gambit as best they could, not being able to touch or kiss or stuff. Gained the ability to use the powers of anyone she's ever absorbed, lost her powers and left the X-Men to do all sorts of stuff with Gambit, got her original powers back, but without those she took from Ms. Marvel, joined the Avengers Unity division, got control over her powers, and promptly got back to doing all that stuff with Gambit. And he liked it, so he put a ring on it. Let's take a look. On her alter ego side, Anna Marie has a recovery of 3, the mutant trait, 11 hit points, and gets 6 cards in hand. As part of her setup, put touched aside, and as a response, when you flip down to this form, put touched aside. Onto her hero side, we get Rogue, who has 2s in all of her hero stats. The X-Men trait, loses a card in hand and has skin contact. Once per round, as an action, attach touched to another character. You gain each of the attached character's traits until the end of the round. And after the player phase begins, set touched aside. So touched will stay on whomever it's on through the villain phase and then pop back off at the beginning of your turn. Well, the 2s in her stats makes her very versatile, but who cares about all that? Let's take a look at touched. It's a condition card, and if you've chosen to attach it to a minion, your attacks gain overkill. If it's on the villain, you'll gain retaliate. On an ally, you'll gain aerial, or on another hero, you'll gain stalwart. Okay, wow. Well, I'll try not to take too personally that my way of life as a solo gamer has been so viciously attacked, because it does say that touched attaches to another character, so you can't put it on yourself. Sorry, the Divinals, but that means that you're never going to get that stalwart effect from touched in true solo. That's a really cool way to handle her ability. I like that a lot. The fact that she's doing it to her surrogate mom in the card art is a choice. Personally, that is not the set of memories that I would like to download into my own brain. Thank you. But that trait absorption means that she's going to be able to use cards that she should not have access to. You can stick out an Avenger ally, and then she can put out Quinn Carrier, or you can put out a Mystic and make Rogue the Sorcerer Supreme. That's good stuff! Rogue's signature ally is Gambit, as played by Remy LeBeau. He's 3 cost and he gets 3 hit points, the X-Men trait, and he does 2 thwart and 2 attack. But when he attacks, you can remove 1 of 3 charge counters that go on him when he enters play to deal 1 damage to an enemy. Notably, not the same enemy, unless you want it to be. It's always fun, though, to punch a minion and then ping a tough status off the villain or something. But that's pretty solid. If you get 3 attacks out of him, he's doing 9 damage, and that's before you put any kind of training on him. That's a good ally. Next up is a 1-cost upgrade, Rogue's Jacket. It's an item, and while touched is on a friendly character, she gets +1 to her thwart, and when it's on an enemy, she gets +1 to her attack, bringing whichever it is up to 3, which I mean, that's pretty nice, especially if touched is on a minion and you're also doing overkill with that boosted damage. Yeah, that's pretty good. Then we're going to get 3 copies of Goin' Rogue, a 2-cost superpower thwart event. As a hero action, remove 3 threat from a scheme. If she's aerial, it'll be 5 threat instead. If she has retaliate, confuse an enemy. And if she has stalwart, draw a card. Cool. So yeah, once again, not having that baked in access to stalwart is kind of a bummer, but this doesn't say that touched has to be giving you those conditions. You could just have those conditions. You could be touching an ally, giving you aerial, but then you also have Dauntless out, giving you retaliate, then you're going to check both of those boxes on this, and that's pretty great. And even if you can't get multiple of these conditions going at the same time when you have this card, it's still pretty good to do 2 resources for 5 threat or 3 threat and a confuse. Next up is 3 copies of Southern Cross, a 3-cost superpower attack event. As a hero, deal 6 damage. If you're aerial, make that 8 damage. If you have retaliate, stun the enemy. And if you have stalwart, draw 1 card. Cool. Again, if you can possibly get 2 or 3 of these conditions, this is absolutely incredible. If you can only get 1, 3 resources for 8 damage is okay. 3 resources for 6 damage and a stun is pretty great. Also, that definitely looks like a Southern uppercut in the card art, right? The way her hand is. That's a 6, not a 2, I think. Then we get 2 copies of Energy Transfer, a 2-cost superpower event. As a hero, attach touch to a character other than Rogue and deal 2 damage to that character. Then heal 2 damage from Rogue and ready her. Gain the attached character's traits until the end of the round. So now you'll be able to use touched on 2 different targets this turn. You can maybe put it on an ally so you can play a card that can only be played by web warriors or whatever, and then still put it on a minion to get overkill. That's pretty cool. Next up is Bulletproof Bell. We get 2 copies of this 1-cost superpower defense event. As a hero interrupt, when an enemy with touched attached to it attacks, prevent all damage done from that attack and gain a tough status. So for just 1 resource, you're preventing all damage from an attack and gaining a tough status so that you can negate a later attack. That's so good. And if you were touching the villain, you've also retaliated. Last up in her kit is 3 copies of Superpower Adaptation, a 0-cost event. It has the Superpower trait, and as a hero action, if touched is attached to a friendly character, search its owner's discard pile for an event that's of the same classification and add it to your hand. Same classification meaning if touched is on a basic ally, you can look for a basic event only. If it's on an aspect ally, you can look for an aspect card only. It is a little limiting, and you're not gonna have very many opportunities to pull your best cards out of your discard pile because you can only pull your hero-specific cards out if touched is on Gambit, your signature ally. It's good. It's just not great. On the other hand, if you play multiplayer or multi-handed, this starts to get a lot more interesting. Rogue can dig into other players' discard piles and pull out some of their character-specific cards, though Rogue does need to be able to play those cards with elements that she controls. The example given on the FAQ on hallofheroes.com, which I guess is as official as we're going to get, says that Rogue can't take something like Captain America's shield toss because she doesn't control Captain America's shield. Makes sense. The bad stuff! Anna Marie's obligation is Deadly Touch. If touched is on a friendly, deal 2 damage to it. If it's on an enemy, or if it's out of play because you're in alter ego, or the minion it had been on was defeated or whatever, place 2 threat on the main scheme. Either way, discard this card, so it might come up again. So it's pretty likely that this is going to kill the ally that you're touching if you're touching an ally, or adding 2 threat to the scheme that's already gotten at least 1 at the top of the villain phase. And then if the villain also schemed this turn, well, you probably just lost. This is a rough obligation. Mystique is Rogue's nemesis. Oh, that's sad. She gets 6 hit points, 1 thwart, and 1 attack. She has the Brotherhood of Mutants and Elite traits, and the Villainous and Toughness keywords. After Mystique engages you, find a copy of the Misled Treachery, which we'll see shortly, and shuffle it into your deck. Toughness and Villainous is a terrible combination. She's going to have a tough status when she comes into play, and she gets to boost each of her activations. Oof. Luckily, that 6 hit points is exactly what Southern Uppercut hits for, so at least there's that, I guess. Her signature side scheme is Mystique's Manipulations. It gets 2 threat per identity and the acceleration icon. When it's defeated, search the deck and discard for a copy of Misled and shuffle it into your deck. So yeah, 2 threat is pretty easy to get rid of, but also 1 acceleration icon is pretty easy to ride for a little bit if you have to, because this is going to be putting another one of those treacheries into your deck, and if it's going into your deck, it can't be good. 3 copies of Misled, a treachery with the Shapeshifter trait. When it's revealed from the encounter deck, shuffle it into your deck and draw and resolve another encounter card. When it enters your hand, add 2 threat to the main scheme. And then you either discard it and it has the chance to cycle back through your deck and come up again, or you just hang on to it so it can't do that. But then it's an entirely dead card in your hand. That's not viable. Why did you even think of that? That's stupid. Moving on to her aspect cards, Rogue came with a protection deck. Up first is Iceman, played by Bobby Drake. He's a 3-cost X-Men ally who has 3 hit points, 1 thwart, and 2 attack. He also gets 3 freeze counters, and after a minion enters play, remove 1 freeze counter to stun that minion. That's pretty great. It's similar to the leadership ally Hawkeye, who does a damage every time a minion enters play. This is going to stun them, which arguably is better. It's maybe not as much better on a minion than it is stunning the villain, but it's still, you don't have to worry about that minion right now. Karma is next, as played by Cheyenne Koman. She's a 2-cost psionic X-Men ally with 1 hit point, 0 thwart, and 0 attack. But when you play Karma from your hand, take control of a non-elite minion and treat it as an ally, where its thwart is equal to its scheme value, and it takes 2 consequential damage when it activates. Awesome. Yeah, 4 cost is a lot for an ally that doesn't hit or thwart, but the minion that she takes control of certainly does. You can activate it to death, and then you still have her to take a hit with her 1 hit point. Then we get Armor in the style of Hisako Ichiki. She's a 2-cost ally with 2 hit points, 1 thwart, and 1 attack. She has the X-Men trait, and so must your identity to play her, and she gets Toughness. 2 cost for a block, an activation, and another block. That's phenomenal. You throw a training on her, you might even get a few activations out of her. 3 copies of Judoka Skill, a 2-cost upgrade with the skill keyword is next. It gets 3 judo counters and a max of 1 per player. As an interrupt, when you defend against an enemy attack, remove 1 judo counter. That enemy gets -2 for that attack. Pretty great way to support those cards that get you something if you don't take any damage when you defend. Great for, Unflappable or Gambit's armor that readies him. Or Not Today, a 1-cost defense event of which we get 3. When your hero defends against an attack, play this as an interrupt to give that defend +2. If you take no damage, remove 2 threat from a scheme. I think this card is great. Protection is my favorite aspect, but threat management is its biggest, let's call it, opportunity for growth. That's what my boss calls it when we have our little chats. You're getting 2 threat, plus it's a defense event for good old flow like water, and you're not taking damage, so Dauntless is going to keep giving you Retaliate, helping you check those boxes on going rogue and Southern Cross. Uppercut. Next up is 1 copy of a basic Persona support, Moira McTaggart, which you can only play if your identity has the mutant trait. As a response, when a mutant changes to their hero form, exhaust Moira. That hero draws a card. Drawing a card is always good. Dipping down to Alter Ego can sometimes be a real momentum killer, so this is going to help you kind of catapult back into your next hero phase. You got to draw a bigger hand size by starting out in Alter Ego, then you flip to Hero. This is drawing you another card, so you're coming in with 7 cards in hand. That helps. 3 copies of a 1-cost upgrade is next. X-Gene can only be played by mutants. Exhaust it to generate a wild resource for an identity-specific event. Got to be played with the mutant trait, not the X-Men trait, so unless you're touching somebody who has the mutant trait, you got to play this in Alter Ego, which is fine. You can use it in either form, but you can only put it out in Alter Ego. We're going to round things out with a leadership card. 3 copies of MedLab, a 1-cost location support, max 1 per player. After an ally is defeated by consequential damage, exhaust MedLab to put that ally on Medlab, limit one ally at a time. And as an alter ego, you can exhaust Medlab to play that ally as if it were in your hand, but it enters play exhausted. Okay, so you can't use it to attack or thwart the turn it comes into play because it's exhausted, but it's still going to do the thing it does when it comes into play if it has one of those things. And now you get to play it for a little bit cheaper because it's not coming directly out of your hand, so you're going to have an extra card in hand to help you pay for it. Just keep bringing Maria Hill back every, 3 turns, or if you're playing Gambit, you can use Beast to recur his resource card that gets him a charge counter, or if you're playing Ironheart, you can use it to keep bringing Moon Girl into play and draw a card for every mental resource that you use. This is great. It's tempting to go crazy, put a bunch of allies into a deck that all have different traits, and then take cards that can only be played if your identity has those traits, because when those allies are in play, you can then play those cards. Definitely easiest to do that kind of deck in Leadership when you can use things like Make the Call to sort of pluck out the allies that you want. Most of the cards that have a trait requirement only require that you have that trait when you put the card into play, not to use them. So theoretically, Rogue could have the X-Jet and Quinn Carrier and Ingenuity all in play and never have to pay for anything ever again. And as I mentioned at the top, taking a few Mystics to try and get Sorcerer Supreme on Rogue is really, really strong. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make good comic book sense, but it's fun for the game. Plus then you're going to have all those other spells that you have access to. It's a fun style of deck. But in general, it feels stronger to try and focus on maybe 2 to 4 traits that you're trying to do. I mean, you can still pull off some pretty crazy stuff, but especially in true solo when you don't have another player's allies to help you get some of those traits, lining up the trait with the ally and the card that you want to play, that gets kind of tricky. 40 cards doesn't seem like a lot until the one you need's at the bottom. The built-in overkill, if you're touching a minion, makes aggression an easy fit. You just want to make sure you take along some Looking for Trouble and Angela to help you find those minions. And also make sure that the minion with touched on it is the last one you punch, so you don't lose the overkill before you're ready to. And touching the villain gives you Retaliate, so protection is also an easy fit. You just take the hits yourself and either boost your defense so you're not taking any damage, or unboost the villain's attack so it's not dealing any damage. Alright, well that's going to do it for Rogue and for the first wave of the X-Men. I'm going to try to get to some of my backlog now that we're between waves, so look for Black Widow to be coming soon. Also, if you've never checked out the other side of this channel, I also do rules videos for games that play or can be played at one player. The next one for that side of things is going to be a game called Obsession, which is basically Jane Austen, the board game, except it's good, I swear, because that sounds so boring. If you'd like to help me keep making these videos, there's a link in the description where you can leave me a little tip, either one time or recurring, and then you can get off my lawn. The Grouchy Nerd.